Hey everyone, and welcome to Jungle Girl Keeps It Real. And today we're going to be keeping it real with philodendrons. Now some phillos like to climb high into the trees, but today's focus is on running philodendrons that literally like to climb across the ground. This here is an advanced and very happy clump of Philodendron gloriosum growing in my garden. Now I live in a wet tropical climate, so these guys can be easily grown in the outdoors all year round. But philodendrons have become extremely popular as houseplants in the last few years, and I want to let you know how you can best grow these beauties in your home and in any climate. Let's take a quick look at how these puppies grow in the wild. You can see here the main growing stem of the plant, and even though it looks like it, it is not a root. These here are the strong fleshy stems that support humongous and very heavy leaves. See how the growing stem creeps along the ground, and at the end here we have the growing tip. So the first mistake houseplant folk often make is that they mistake this growing stem for a root and treat it as such, and this always leads to the stem rotting and the plant eventually dying. Rule 1, never bury the growing stem. The actual roots are very fine and delicate and can be found growing off the stem. These are the roots that ultimately anchor the plant to the ground or in the pot. Also, have a look how dry this is. Even here in the jungle, this ground is rock hard and dry. These phillos do not like wet feet and need to dry out between watering. Rule 2, do not overwater. The temperature here does not vary much at all, with winters running at 18 to 28 degrees and summers running at 26 to 36 degrees Celsius. So these plants have the luxury of not having to adapt to extremes of temperature, bringing us to rule number 3, keep the temperature as even as possible. Humidity and even temperatures can be tough to manage in some parts of the world. If you don't have a conservatory, then try a well-lit bathroom or a sunroom, and daily misting of your plant will help to keep the humidity up. After all, this is a jungle plant. So rule number 4, keep the humidity high. So let's take a look at the best way to pot up and grow creeping philodendrons. It is important to get your potting mix just right, and one thing that these puppies need is perfect drainage. So here I have a really good quality commercial potting mix, and you can see it clumps up nicely in my hand. So this mix on its own would be perfect for ferns and many other terrestrial plants, but it's far too dense for our phillos. And over here we have perlite. Now it's an expanded volcanic material that improves drainage, but you could also use coarse sand. If you don't want to make your own mix, then I would recommend purchasing a mix designed for succulents or even something designed for orchids and other epiphytes. I'm also adding a scoop of control release fertiliser to the mix, which should give me feeding for up to 6 months. So just go ahead and mix that through. You can see here that the mix still holds together nicely, but has that perlite to help keep it free draining. So I guess that brings us to rule number 5, always use a free draining potting mix. I'm going to be potting up a Philodendron mamei today. Chances are, if you purchase your plant through the internet, it will arrive to you as a bare-rooted plant, which simply means that the soil has been removed from the roots to keep the cost of postage down. When you first receive a plant in the post, I recommend that you give it a good hour-long soak in some fresh water just to let it rehydrate after being in the post. So you can see here our rehydrated plant has a growing stem like the phillos we looked at previously, and it has a growing tip. You can also have a good look at these fine roots coming off the growing stem. These roots are the only part of the plant that should be below the soil. So I'm going to take a nice clean large pot, at least 15 centimetres across. These plants need a big pot because they need room to grow. I have put a handful of gravel in here. This will help with the drainage, but it also helps to weigh the pot down. These plants are extremely top heavy once established, and the mix is light, so you want to make sure it is not going to topple over. You are also going to need a plant support like this ladder, or you could use some bamboo stakes, and you also need something to secure your plant like these little wire ties. So before we get started, I want to show you where people go wrong with this. The stem looks a lot like a fleshy root, so folks not accustomed to growing these sorts of plants can easily fall into the trap where they bury the growing stem. Doing it this way also means the plant stands up, but unfortunately your stem will rot away in a few weeks and the plant will die. This is kind of like burying a tree trunk, so only a few leaves are sticking out of the soil. So, as I said before, the only part of this plant you want buried are these really fine roots. You also want to make sure that the growing stem has room to move by planting the growing tip furthest from the edge of the pot. Lightly cover the fine roots with the mix, making sure not to cover that stem. Now obviously with nothing but the fine roots to secure the plant, it will topple over unless you give it support. So this little plastic ladder does the trick as it pins the stem to the potting mix, and I can also secure some of those leaf stems to the ladder with these wire ties. You can also use tent pegs to secure larger plants. Once these fine roots have established in the pot, the plant will be secure and anchored. Here is an example of a gloriosum that is literally growing out of its pot, and the pot has flex to accompany it. These philodendrons are remarkably easy to propagate from stem cutting. This gloriosum stem has sprawled across the ground and is part of a much larger clump. It's not really producing leaves anymore, so I'm going to remove it by cutting here and here. Gently shake the soil from the fine roots. Now I often recommend that a would-be houseplant hoarder looking to grow one of these do so from a stem cutting rather than purchasing a plant with established leaves. Firstly, it is a lot cheaper, but also you will find that if you propagate from a stem cutting in your climate zone, the resulting plant will be less stressed. I'm going to cut this stem in between each of the old leaf nodes and make 5 pieces. All you have to do is partially submerge these pieces in a well-drained mix. Keep them warm, and they like a humid and shaded spot. Now we just have to wait for the magic to happen. It takes between 4 and 8 weeks depending upon the weather and the time of year, but each one of these cuttings is going to produce a new shoot which will eventually become a new growing stem producing leaves of its own. These guys are ready to pot up into a free draining mix in much the same way we did with our mamei earlier. Interestingly, you can use this method to propagate all sorts of aroids. Here is a philodendron hybrid called Majestic. Here is an Anthurium balloanum. This is a Monstera stolipticana. Another philodendron. And this one here is an Anthurium crystallinum. Did you get those rules? If not, here is a recap. Never bury the growing stem, do not overwater, keep the temperature as even as possible, keep the humidity high, always use a free draining potting mix, soak posted plants in water before potting up, use a big pot to give the plant room to grow, and if you do bury the growing stem, always see rule number 1. Plants need to be secured until they establish, and it is always cheaper and easier to grow from a root cutting than an established plant. So, thanks for tuning in, and I hope that you have mountains of success growing your creeping philodendrons. If you have any questions, then please leave them in the comments section below. And if you want to see more videos like this one, please subscribe to my channel and remember to keep it real.